The battlefield was a cruel place for love to bloom, but fate had its own way of weaving stories no one could predict. Captain Leon Varek knew this all too well as he crouched behind the crumbling remains of an old city wall, his pulse steady despite the chaos raging around him. Explosions echoed through the ruined streets of Kelbaris, the once thriving capital now reduced to rubble by a war that neither side seemed willing to end. The enemy was closing in, and he was deep behind their lines, cut off from his unit. But Leon was not alone. Beside him, her sharp green eyes scanning the battlefield with fierce determination, was Illyria Kale, a soldier of the enemy nation. Not just any soldier. She was one of their elite, a shadow blade, trained to hunt down and eliminate targets with deadly efficiency. And yet, here she was, her sleek black armor smeared with dust and blood, standing by his side instead of turning her blade against him. They had met under fire, not as enemies but as two souls stranded in a conflict neither wished for. Leon had been gravely wounded when his squad was ambushed. Left for dead, he had expected the Shadow Blade to finish him. Instead, she had pulled him to safety, against all logic, against her orders. "You're insane," Leon had told her when she first refused to abandon him. "Maybe," Illyria had replied, her voice like steel wrapped in silk, "but I don't kill men who don't deserve it." Now, 3 days later, their uneasy alliance had turned into something deeper. Trust. A dangerous thing behind enemy lines, but neither could deny it any longer. Every step they took together through enemy-controlled territory brought them closer to discovery. And yet, neither of them turned back. A sudden sound, footsteps on shattered glass, snapped them both into action. Leon raised his stolen rifle while Illyria drew a slender blade from her thigh sheath. The enemy patrol was close. Too close. They pressed their backs against the cold wall, exchanging a glance that spoke volumes. Illyria whispered, "There's a passage under the ruins of the Eastern Chapel. It leads to the outskirts." Leon hesitated. "And you know this because?" "Because it's how I was supposed to escape after killing you." Her lips curled into a wry smirk before she grabbed his arm and pulled him forward. They moved quickly, dodging the patrols, slipping through the ruins like ghosts. But luck had never been kind to either of them. A floodlight blazed to life. There. Gunfire erupted. Leon pushed Illyria ahead as bullets whizzed past. They dove behind a rusted vehicle, breathing hard. He could see the chapel ruins in the distance, so close, yet impossibly far under the hail of gunfire. "We split up," Illyria said, her voice urgent. "You take the left. I'll draw their fire." "No," Leon growled. "I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice." She met his gaze, and for the first time, her eyes softened. "Leon, go." It wasn't just an order. It was something deeper. A plea. A promise. Heart-pounding, he ran. The world blurred into streaks of fire and shadow as he weaved between cover, reaching the ruins just as Illyria's diversion faltered. He turned back, just in time to see her fall, a dart striking her neck. Not a bullet. A tranquilizer. Leon clenched his fists as masked soldiers swarmed her, dragging her away. The fire in his veins told him to fight, but the voice of reason held him back. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. Behind enemy lines, a love unbroken. The battlefield was a cruel place for love to bloom, but fate had its own way of weaving stories no one could predict. Captain Leon Varek knew this all too well as he crouched behind the crumbling remains of an old city wall, his pulse steady despite the chaos raging around him. Explosions echoed through the ruined streets of Kelbaris, the once thriving capital now reduced to rubble by a war that neither side seemed willing to end. The enemy was closing in, and he was deep behind their lines, cut off from his unit. But Leon was not alone. Beside him, her sharp green eyes scanning the battlefield with fierce determination, was Illyria Kale, a soldier of the enemy nation. Not just any soldier. She was one of their elite, a shadow blade, trained to hunt down and eliminate targets with deadly efficiency. And yet, here she was, her sleek black armor smeared with dust and blood, standing by his side instead of turning her blade against him. They had met under fire, not as enemies but as two souls stranded in a conflict neither wished for. Leon had been gravely wounded when his squad was ambushed. Left for dead, he had expected the Shadow Blade to finish him. Instead, she had pulled him to safety, against all logic, against her orders. "You're insane," Leon had told her when she first refused to abandon him. "Maybe," Illyria had replied, her voice like steel wrapped in silk, "but I don't kill men who don't deserve it." Now, 3 days later, their uneasy alliance had turned into something deeper. Trust. A dangerous thing behind enemy lines, but neither could deny it any longer. Every step they took together through enemy-controlled territory brought them closer to discovery. And yet, neither of them turned back. A sudden sound, footsteps on shattered glass, snapped them both into action. Leon raised his stolen rifle while Illyria drew a slender blade from her thigh sheath. The enemy patrol was close. Too close. They pressed their backs against the cold wall, exchanging a glance that spoke volumes. Illyria whispered, "There's a passage under the ruins of the Eastern Chapel. It leads to the outskirts." Leon hesitated. "And you know this because?" "Because it's how I was supposed to escape after killing you." Her lips curled into a wry smirk before she grabbed his arm and pulled him forward. They moved quickly, dodging the patrols, slipping through the ruins like ghosts. But luck had never been kind to either of them. A floodlight blazed to life. There. Gunfire erupted. Leon pushed Illyria ahead as bullets whizzed past. They dove behind a rusted vehicle, breathing hard. He could see the chapel ruins in the distance. So close, yet impossibly far under the hail of gunfire. "We split up," Illyria said, her voice urgent. "You take the left. I'll draw their fire." "No," Leon growled. "I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice." She met his gaze, and for the first time, her eyes softened. "Leon, go." It wasn't just an order. It was something deeper. A plea. A promise. Heart-pounding, he ran. The world blurred into streaks of fire and shadow as he weaved between cover, reaching the ruins just as Illyria's diversion faltered. He turned back, just in time to see her fall, a dart striking her neck. Not a bullet. A tranquilizer. Leon clenched his fists as masked soldiers swarmed her, dragging her away. The fire in his veins told him to fight, but the voice of reason held him back. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. Leon crouched in the darkness of the ruined chapel, his breath shallow, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had seen many things in war. Comrades lost, enemies crushed, but nothing compared to the sight of Illyria being dragged away, her body limp, her vibrant green eyes dimming before unconsciousness took her. His first instinct had been to charge after her, to fight until there was nothing left of him. But that would have been foolish. He was deep in enemy territory, alone, outgunned. He needed a plan. He needed to be smart. Swallowing his rage, he forced himself to retreat through the hidden passage beneath the chapel ruins. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay, the tunnel a relic of a war long past. It led him beyond the immediate search perimeter, but his mind was not on his escape. Illyria had saved him. Twice. Now, it was his turn. By sunrise, he was in the outskirts of Kelbaris, blending into the desperate crowds of war refugees and displaced civilians. With his stolen enemy uniform and a few hastily applied burns to his face to appear injured, he moved unseen, gathering information. The soldiers who had taken Illyria belonged to the Black Talon Brigade, an elite unit known for their ruthless interrogations and brutal efficiency. If they had her, she wasn't dead. Not yet. But time was against him. Disguised as a wounded soldier, he slipped into an overcrowded medical station near an enemy outpost. The whispers among the lower-ranked officers told him what he needed to know. Illyria had been taken to the Iron Bastion, a heavily fortified prison complex just beyond the city limits. Few ever left the bastion alive. Leon smirked. He was going to be the exception. Illyria awoke to cold steel against her wrists, her body strapped to a chair in a dimly lit room. The sterile scent of antiseptic and iron filled the air. A single figure loomed before her, a tall man with sharp, cruel eyes, and a uniform marked with the insignia of the Black Talon Brigade. "Illyria Kale," he said, his voice smooth, calculated. "I must admit, I didn't expect to find you in such interesting company." Illyria's head throbbed, but she forced herself to smirk. "Sorry to disappoint, Commander RHYV." He exhaled a quiet chuckle. "Oh, not at all. In fact, this is a pleasant surprise. One of our finest shadow blades, caught protecting an enemy? It makes me wonder." He leaned closer. "Have you forgotten where your loyalties lie?" Her smile never wavered. "You're assuming I ever had them." His expression darkened. "Careful, Kale. Treason is not something I take lightly. Neither is blind obedience." RHYV studied her for a moment before standing straight. "Very well. Since you're feeling defiant, let's see how long that lasts." He gestured to a guard. "Take her to Block 17. We'll break her in time." As they unshackled her from the chair, she allowed herself a single thought. "Leon, don't be stupid." Leon was about to do something incredibly stupid. Night had fallen when he reached the outskirts of the Iron Bastion. The complex was a fortress of steel and stone, surrounded by electrified fences, guard towers, and patrols with orders to shoot on sight. A direct assault was suicide, which is why he wasn't planning one. Instead, he waited for a supply convoy. When it approached the main gate, he slipped beneath one of the trucks, clinging to its undercarriage as it rumbled inside. Once through security, he rolled free, pressing himself into the shadows. Now, he just had to find her. Moving through the facility was a delicate dance of patience and instinct. He took out a lone guard with swift precision, stripping him of his uniform. It was risky, but necessary. As he made his way deeper into the prison, he overheard something chilling. "They're moving the Shadow Blade to the lower levels. Interrogations starting soon." Leon's grip on his stolen rifle tightened. "Not on my watch." Illyria's hands were bound as they marched her down the dimly lit corridors of Block 17. The guards flanked her, their weapons at the ready. They thought she was defeated. Fools. She had been trained to endure worse. She had been trained to escape. Just as she was preparing to make her move, the entire facility trembled. A distant explosion rocked the walls, alarms blaring to life. The guards faltered. That was all she needed. Spinning, she kicked the first guard's knee, sending him sprawling. Before the second could react, she twisted her wrists, snapping the restraints apart. Because, of course, she had been working on that since the moment they put them on her. Gunfire erupted, but Illyria was faster. She grabbed a fallen weapon, taking down her enemies with ruthless precision. Then, amidst the chaos, she heard it. A voice crackling through the security comms. "Illyria, if you're still alive, I suggest you start running. I just blew a hole in the north wall. Meet me there." She smirked. "Idiot." And she ran. Leon fired at the pursuing guards as he sprinted through the maze of corridors. Explosions echoed behind him as he set off another charge. The entire prison was descending into chaos, just as planned. Then he saw her. Illyria burst into the corridor ahead, her face streaked with sweat and blood, eyes burning with fierce determination. For a single second, neither of them moved, the war raging around them forgotten. Then she ran to him. Leon grabbed her hand, pulling her forward. Time to go. Together, they sprinted toward the breach he had created. The entire Black Talon Brigade was descending upon them, but it didn't matter, because they weren't just escaping. They were fighting back, and this war wasn't over yet. The night air hit them like a cold slap as they burst through the gaping hole in the north wall of the Iron Bastion. Smoke and fire swirled around them, the alarms wailing behind like a death knell for anyone left inside. Leon didn't slow down. Neither did Illyria. They ran, weaving through the wreckage, dodging the scattered fire from the surviving guards. A bullet zipped past Leon's ear, close enough to make his heart skip, but he didn't flinch. He just tightened his grip on Illyria's hand. "Keep moving," he shouted. "You don't have to tell me twice," she shot back. A spotlight from a patrol tower flared to life, sweeping across the rubble. It caught them mid-stride, bathing them in a blinding beam. Target acquired. "Stop them." A dozen rifles clicked into position. Leon shoved Illyria forward. Go. She hesitated for only a fraction of a second, long enough for him to see the flicker of defiance in her eyes. But then she ran. They dove into the ruins of an old trench just as a hail of bullets peppered the ground where they had stood. Leon gritted his teeth. They wouldn't last much longer like this. They needed an exit. Tell me you have a plan, Illyria said, pressing her back against the broken trench wall. Of course I have a plan. She raised an eyebrow. Liar. Fine. I have half a plan. She sighed. That's half more than usual. Footsteps crunched above them. The enemy was closing in. Leon's mind raced. Then it hit him. The supply trucks. I hit their fuel depot during the distraction. The east gate should be in flames right now, he said. That means their backup is cut off, and their transport yard is lightly guarded. Illyria's eyes flashed with understanding. We steal a vehicle. Exactly. She smirked. I knew there was a reason I didn't let you die back there. Flattering. They moved quickly, staying low, slipping through the ruins like shadows. Gunfire still crackled in the distance, the chaos of the prison break giving them just enough cover. They reached the transport yard within minutes. A row of armored transports sat idle, engines off. Only a handful of guards remained. Most of the forces had been drawn toward the breach. Pick one, Leon murmured. Illyria studied the lineup before pointing to a sleek, reinforced scout vehicle near the edge. That one. Fast, armored, and not as loud as the others. Leon nodded. I'll handle the driver. She grinned. I'll handle the rest. Before he could respond, she was already moving. Illyria struck like a ghost, silent, precise. The first guard barely had time to turn before she knocked him out cold. The second managed a strangled gasp before her elbow met his throat. Leon, meanwhile, had crept up to the scout vehicle, where a lone officer was sitting in the driver's seat, casually smoking a cigar. Leon knocked on the window. The officer frowned, rolling it down. What the hell? Leon punched him in the face. The man slumped forward, unconscious. Illyria slid into the passenger seat just as Leon shoved the body aside and took the wheel. Smooth, she remarked. Get in. Shut up and buckle up. She smirked and did exactly that. Leon gunned the engine, and the scout vehicle roared to life. The remaining guards barely had time to react before the reinforced tires chewed through the dirt, sending them barreling toward the outer gates. Gates closed, Illyria said. Not for long. Leon floored it. The armored vehicle smashed through the checkpoint like a battering ram, metal shrieking as the gates twisted and crumpled under the force. Alarms blared once more, but by then, they were already speeding down the winding dirt road into the dark wilderness. Behind them, the iron bastion shrank into the night. Illyria exhaled, leaning back against her seat. You are officially the craziest person I've ever met. Leon grinned. Took you long enough to figure that out. But the moment of triumph was short-lived. A low hum filled the air. Illyria stiffened. Do you hear that? Leon did. And it wasn't good. He glanced at the rearview mirror. Then he swore. Chasing them, cutting through the night like black wraiths, were 3 enemy gunships. Their searchlights flared, locking onto the vehicle, and a mechanical voice crackled over the comms. Unidentified vehicle, surrender immediately or be destroyed. Leon tightened his grip on the wheel. So, about that plan. Illyria smirked, pulling out her rifle. Time for the other half. The chase was on. The roar of the enemy gunships filled the night, their searchlights sweeping across the battered road as they closed in. Leon gritted his teeth, pushing the scout vehicle to its limits. The reinforced tires kicked up dust and debris, but speed alone wouldn't save them, not against aerial hunters. Illyria was already leaning out of the window, rifle raised. Keep it steady, she called over the wind and engine noise. Sure, I'll just ask the attack helicopters to hold still while you shoot them, Leon shot back. The lead gunship fired first. A streak of red-hot plasma scorched the ground just meters behind them, the explosion rattling the vehicle like a tin can in a storm. Illyria cursed. They're not playing around. No kidding, Leon growled, jerking the wheel hard to avoid another blast. I don't suppose that rifle of yours comes with anti-air capabilities? Not unless I throw it really hard. That's not. A barrage of bullets tore through the trees beside them, cutting off his retort. Illyria fired, her shot clipping the wing of the nearest gunship. Sparks erupted, but the ship barely wobbled. I need a better angle, she shouted. Leon's eyes darted to the terrain ahead. The road was leading them toward a ravine. Steep cliffs, jagged rocks, and only one narrow bridge spanning the gap. It was a death trap, which meant it was perfect. I hope you like high-speed stunts. Leon shouted as he swerved toward the ravine. Illyria barely had time to see what he was doing before the vehicle hit a broken section of road, launching them momentarily airborne. She let out a string of curses as she ducked back into the cabin. You're insane. You keep saying that. The bridge loomed ahead, narrow and unstable. The gunships, sensing the trap, spread out, one of them soaring ahead to cut them off on the other side. Leon floored the accelerator. Hold on to something. The vehicle hit the bridge at full speed. The wooden planks beneath them groaned, splintering under the weight. The first gunship fired, its plasma rounds tearing through the bridge behind them. One of the support beams collapsed. Illyria looked back. Leon, we don't have a bridge anymore. Not my problem yet. The second gunship fired, aiming for the front of the bridge. Leon made a snap decision. He veered left, toward the cliff. For a heartbeat, Illyria thought he had lost his mind completely. But then she saw it. A slope of loose rock running along the edge, steep but just stable enough to drive on. Don't you dare. Leon yanked the wheel. The vehicle skidded off the crumbling bridge and onto the rocky slope, tires screeching as they tore into the uneven ground. For a moment, everything was weightless. Then, the impact nearly jolted them out of their seats. Leon wrestled the wheel, keeping the vehicle from flipping as they careened down the cliffside at a suicidal angle. Behind them, the bridge finally gave way, sending flaming wreckage crashing into the abyss below. The first gunship tried to follow, but it was too slow. The debris slammed into its rotor, sending it spinning wildly before it crashed into the canyon wall in a fireball. Illyria exhaled sharply. One down. Leon grinned. 2 to go. The remaining gunships circled, but the uneven terrain made it difficult for them to get a clean shot. Leon aimed for a dry riverbed at the base of the ravine, where he could lose them in the winding rock formations. They'll track us, Illyria warned. Not if we give them something better to chase, Leon said, reaching for a small detonator on his belt. Illyria's eyes widened. Please tell me that's not. Leon pressed the trigger. A series of distant explosions rocked the upper cliffs, the explosives he had planted earlier at the prison. The ground trembled as a controlled landslide cascaded down, sending a cloud of dust and boulders crashing into the valley. The gunships hesitated. The avalanche was unpredictable, forcing them to pull back. Leon didn't waste the opportunity. He pushed the vehicle harder, weaving through the canyon's maze-like terrain until the lights of their pursuers finally disappeared. Silence. Only the hum of the engine and their heavy breathing remained. Leon finally let out a breath, easing off the accelerator. He glanced at Illyria, who was still gripping the dashboard like she was deciding whether to strangle him or thank him. See? Half a plan, he said, smirking. Illyria stared at him for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she laughed, a short, incredulous laugh. You're an idiot, she muttered, shaking her head. But I'm your idiot, she sighed. Unfortunately, the moment didn't last long. They both knew the escape had only bought them time. The Black Talon Brigade wouldn't stop hunting them. And now, they were fugitives, Leon, a rogue soldier, Illyria, a traitor to her own people. But as the dust settled and the stars stretched above them, neither of them regretted it. Because together, they had something the war had never given them before. A chance. And they weren't about to waste it. Dawn painted the horizon in streaks of orange and violet as Leon guided the battered scout vehicle through the winding canyon. The adrenaline was finally wearing off, leaving exhaustion in its wake. But neither he nor Illyria could afford to stop. Not yet. They'll be regrouping, Illyria said, watching the sky for any sign of the gunships. We bought time, not safety. Leon nodded. Then let's use it. The war had made them enemies. Circumstance had made them allies. But now, after everything, they were something else entirely. Two people with nowhere to go except forward, together. For hours, they drove in silence, crossing through desolate plains and burned-out villages, remnants of a war neither of them believed in anymore. The further they got from the Iron Bastion, the heavier the reality of their situation became. They weren't just escaping, they were defecting. Illyria broke the silence first. "I have a contact." Leon glanced at her. "A friendly one, I hope?" "Relatively." She smirked. "He's a fixer, works in the neutral zones. If we can reach him, he can get us off-world." Leon exhaled, gripping the wheel. "And what then? We just disappear? Unless you'd rather go back to your side and explain how you fell in love with the enemy?" Leon nearly choked. What?" Illyria turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You think I don't see it?" Her voice softened just enough to make his pulse stutter. "Everything you did to come back for me. Everything I did to keep you alive. If that's not love, Varek, then tell me what is." Leon focused on the road ahead, but his fingers clenched the steering wheel a little too tightly. He had spent his entire life believing in duty, in the mission, in the black and white simplicity of war. But now, all he could see was her. "Fine," he muttered. "I love you." Illyria raised an eyebrow. "That easy?" Leon sighed. "No. It's a mess, and it's going to get us both killed. But yes, I love you." He glanced at her. "Happy?" She grinned. "Ask me when we make it out alive." The neutral zone wasn't much more than a sprawling city of misfits, criminals, and those who had no place left in the war. It was the only place where neither side had control, but that didn't mean it was safe. Leon parked the stolen vehicle in an alley, checking the streets. "This fixer of yours, he trustworthy?" "Depends on your definition." Illyria led him through the maze of market stalls and neon-lit signs, past mercenaries and exiles, until they reached a rundown bar tucked between two towering buildings. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the sound of old music. A man sat at the far end of the bar, polishing a glass with slow, deliberate movements. He was older, scarred, with cybernetic implants running along his neck and arms. Illyria strode up to him. "Tavian." The man looked up, his mechanical eye whirring as it focused on her. "Kale, thought you were dead." "Almost," she admitted. "We need passage off-world. No questions, no records." Tavian studied her, then glanced at Leon. "And the soldier?" Leon folded his arms. "The soldier is with her." Tavian smirked. "That's so?" He leaned forward. "You do realize what you're asking me, right? A rogue Shadowblade and a deserter? Both sides will put a bounty so big on your heads. Half the galaxy will be hunting you." Illyria didn't flinch. "Can you do it or not?" Tavian sighed. "I can, but it won't be cheap." Leon reached into his vest and pulled out a small data chip. "Stole this from the Iron Bastion's mainframe before we escaped. It's got security codes, patrol routes, troop deployments." He slid it across the bar. "Worth enough?" Tavian picked it up, his cybernetic eye scanning it. After a moment, he whistled. "You really want out that bad, huh?" Leon glanced at Illyria, then back at Tavian. "Yeah, we do." Tavian chuckled, pocketing the chip. "All right, you've got a ride. Docks, midnight. Be there and don't bring trouble." Midnight came, and with it, their final chance to escape. The starport was crawling with mercs and bounty hunters, but Tavian's crew got them through undetected. A sleek, unmarked freighter sat waiting on the tarmac, its engines already humming. Leon took a breath. They had made it. As they approached the ramp, Illyria glanced back at the city. "You sure about this?" Leon smirked. "Not even a little." She chuckled. "Good." They stepped onto the ship together, side by side. The ramp closed behind them, sealing off the past. The engines roared to life, and in the next moment, they were airborne, leaving the war, the lies, and the life they once knew behind.